Eliza pushed open the rusted iron gate, its squeal echoing like a dying cry. The path was overgrown with tangled brambles, and each step she took stirred centuries-old leaves that crackled underfoot, as if warning her away. But the thrill of discovery urged her forward. The manor itself loomed ahead, its facade scarred by time and neglect. Windows, once bright with life, now stared blankly like hollow eyes into the night. Inside, the grand foyer was shrouded in a heavy gloom. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of moonlight that broke through shattered glass. An overwhelming silence hung in the air, a silence so deep it pressed upon her ears like the quiet breath of the grave. As Eliza explored room after room, she noted signs of a hurried departure. Scattered belongings, a half-finished cup of tea still cooling on a porcelain table, and portraits of a family whose eyes seemed to follow her with silent accusation. It wasn't long before she sensed a presence, an inexplicable chill that settled in the pit of her stomach. In the far corner of the drawing room, an antique mirror reflected not only her anxious face, but behind her, a faint, spectral figure of a woman in a long, tattered gown. Eliza whipped around, heart pounding, but found nothing there. Had her imagination betrayed her? Yet the temperature dropped even further, and the unmistakable scent of wilted roses and decay filled the air. Determined to uncover the truth behind the ghostly apparition, Eliza set up her recording equipment, determined to capture evidence of the paranormal. As midnight approached, the mansion came alive with an eerie symphony of creaks and whispers. Shadows stretched in impossible shapes along the walls, and soft sobs echoed through the empty corridors. Venturing into the manor's library, she discovered a dusty ledger chronicling the tragic fate of the Blackwood family. The entries described inexplicable losses, sudden deaths, unaccounted disappearances, and spectral visitations that terrorized the inhabitants for years. One entry, dated more than a century ago, detailed the sorrow of a woman whose husband had been lost at sea, and whose grief was so overwhelming that she wandered the halls night after night, searching for him. It was said that her spirit never found peace, and that her anguish was locked forever within the walls of the mansion. As Eliza read, the sound of soft, echoing footsteps reached her ears. The pages of the ledger fluttered as if caught in a violent wind. In a moment of dread-filled clarity, she realized the footsteps were not her own. They belonged to someone or something else. The sobbing grew louder, accompanied by a low, mournful lullaby that drifted from the upper floor. Heart hammering in her chest, Eliza followed the sound up a grand staircase, cloaked in shadows. At the top of the stairs, she found a long corridor lined with closed doors. The sobbing stopped abruptly at the door at the very end. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing a dim, candle-lit room. In the center, a spectral figure hovered over an old, ornate mirror. The woman's eyes glimmered with unearthly sorrow, and her translucent fingers traced invisible patterns in the air. As Eliza stepped into the room, the ghost turned, her gaze meeting Eliza's with an intensity that chilled her very soul. A whisper filled the room, a voice not quite human, layered with the echoes of lost time. "Help me," it pleaded, the sound resonating deep within the ancient wood of the manor. It was the voice of the grieving wife, eternally bound to this place by sorrow and regret. As the ghostly figure approached, her form wavering like smoke in a breeze, Eliza felt the crushing weight of despair. Memories of the woman's loss and the unending search for her lost love seeped into the very air, turning the space into a mausoleum of pain. Eliza's rational mind warred with the rising terror in her heart. Was this a tragic spirit seeking solace or something far more malevolent? As she hesitated, the ghost reached out a translucent hand, her touch icy and insistent. In that moment, the manor's ancient curse unfurled around her. The walls groaned as if burdened by the weight of untold sorrows, and the air filled with a chorus of anguished voices, whispers of those who had been lost to the manor's dark history. In a final surge of bravery, Eliza steadied herself and spoke softly, "I'm here. I want to help." The ghost's sorrowful eyes flickered with a glimmer of hope before deep darkness swept over them both. The room plunged into shadow, the candle flames sputtering and dying as the spectral figures of the past emerged from every corner, their silent laments enveloping the space. For what felt like an eternity, time stretched into an endless nightmare of grief and despair. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the grimy windows, the apparitions faded, leaving behind only the echo of their cries. Eliza found herself alone in the empty room, clutching the ledger as if it were a lifeline. She left Blackwood Manor with more questions than answers, her soul forever marked by the encounter. The mansion still stands at the edge of town, a somber monument to tragedy and loss, and its windows continue to reflect the lingering sorrow of those who once lived and died within its walls. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind howls just right, a lonely whisper can be heard echoing from its depths, a plea for help that transcends time and death. Part 2: Shadows Beyond the Manor. The pale light of dawn had barely faded into memory when Eliza found herself burdened with more than just the relic of Blackwood Manor's tragic past. The worn leather ledger, heavy with secrets and sorrow, was now an inescapable part of her reality. As she trudged through the quiet, cobbled streets of the nearby town, its silence was punctuated only by her restless footsteps and the distant murmur of a wind that seemed to whisper her name. In the days that followed, the line between waking life and the spectral realm grew disturbingly thin. Eliza began to notice strange occurrences wherever she went. Mirages of tattered gowns drifting at the edge of her vision, cold gusts of wind that carried a scent of wilted roses and decay, and fleeting echoes of sorrowful voices that no one else could hear. The ledger's pages, filled with cryptic records of loss and torment, became her obsession, beckoning her to uncover the truth behind the mansion's curse. Determined to piece together the fragments of a mystery that stretched back through time, Eliza visited the local archives and interviewed the town's elders, who spoke in hushed, wary tones of Blackwood Manor. They recounted chilling legends of a long-deceased matriarch who wandered the corridors in perpetual mourning, of unexplained disappearances tied to tragic love and bitter betrayal, and of an ancient sorrow that had seeped into the very soil of the land. Every story deepened the chill in her heart and ignited an inextinguishable flame of curiosity. One overcast evening, as rain began to patter softly against the window pane of her modest lodgings, Eliza discovered an old leather-bound journal hidden among the town's neglected records. Its brittle pages bore the meticulous handwriting of a man whose eyes had once witnessed the horrors of Blackwood Manor. He wrote of secret rooms, hidden passages behind the walls of the mansion, and rituals performed in desperate attempts to appease a restless spirit. The entries hinted that the curse was not confined solely to the manor's decaying structure. It was a malignant force, entwined with the destiny of everyone who dared to cross its threshold. Haunted by the journal's revelations and the recurring visions of the sorrowful ghost from the manor, Eliza felt an irresistible pull to return. The ledger and the journal seemed to call out in unison, demanding that she confront the lingering shadows of the past. With trepidation mingling with resolve, she planned a midnight return to Blackwood Manor. This time, she would not be a mere observer. Instead, she intended to unravel the enigma of the curse, and perhaps, in doing so, bring some measure of peace to the tormented souls that haunted its halls. The night of her return arrived cloaked in a thick, impenetrable mist. As she approached the manor once more, the air itself seemed to vibrate with suppressed grief and warning. The front gate creaked open, as if inviting her in, and the familiar sense of foreboding wrapped around her like a shroud. With the ledger and the newly discovered journal clutched tightly, Eliza stepped into the darkness of Blackwood Manor, her heart pounding in sync with the unearthly silence that greeted her. Inside, the manor appeared different in the deep midnight gloom. Shadows moved with purposeful intent along the walls, and a subtle, mournful melody seemed to float through the corridors, an echo of a past that refused to rest. In the drawing room, where she had once encountered the spectral figure, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy. The ghostly presence, now more defined and resolute than before, awaited her arrival. Its eyes, deep wells of sorrow and longing, seemed to convey both a plea for redemption and a warning of the trials to come. Eliza's journey had become a descent into a labyrinth of memory, loss, and the relentless grip of a cursed legacy. With every creaking floorboard and every whisper in the dark, she stepped deeper into a story that was as old as the manor itself. A story where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and where the past, with all its haunted truths, would not be allowed to remain forgotten. And so, with resolve tempered by fear and compassion, Eliza advanced into the abyss of Blackwood Manor, determined to confront the lingering shadows that had shaped its tragic history, and perhaps, in doing so, to free not only the tormented spirits trapped within, but also her own soul from the weight of an ancient sorrow. Part 3. The Curse Unveiled. Eliza stood frozen in the grand decaying hall of Blackwood Manor, her breath shallow as the spectral woman reached toward her. The ghost's sorrowful, hollow eyes held something deeper than fear, an urgent plea. The candlelight flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. The house itself seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, as if awakening from a long slumber. For a moment, Eliza hesitated. Was she ready to embrace the unknown? To confront the history that had been buried for centuries? Then, something inside her shifted. She extended her hand toward the ghost. The moment their fingers brushed, a surge of cold rushed through Eliza's body. The room around her warped, the walls trembling as if the entire manor was unraveling. Her vision blurred, and then darkness. When Eliza opened her eyes, she was no longer in the present. She stood inside the manor, but it was no longer in ruins. The grand chandelier above her gleamed with golden light, and the scent of fresh roses drifted through the air. Voices echoed in the halls, laughter, music, the hum of a lively home. Eliza turned and saw her, the ghost, but now flesh and blood, alive and radiant. She wore a fine blue gown, her hair pinned up in soft curls. A warm smile graced her lips as she held the hand of a man dressed in a deep navy suit. His features were sharp and kind, his dark eyes filled with adoration as he whispered something into her ear. The sight filled Eliza's chest with something foreign, longing perhaps, a sense of déjà vu. But before she could move closer, the scene shifted. A cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the chandelier's glow. The once beautiful manor darkened, its pristine walls bleeding into decay. The woman's laughter turned to desperate cries. The man in the navy suit was no longer at her side. Instead, she stood alone, trembling as faceless figures in dark cloaks surrounded her. Their voices were harsh, accusing, their words laced with venom. Witch! Eliza gasped. The woman, the ghost, was accused of witchcraft. The faceless figures dragged the woman toward the grand staircase. She screamed, her voice raw with betrayal. Eliza felt a desperate urge to stop them, but she was trapped in this vision, merely a spectator to the past. The ghostly woman, once full of life, was bound and forced to kneel at the base of the staircase. The air crackled with energy as one of the cloaked figures, an elder with piercing grey eyes, raised a gnarled hand. "Eliza Blackwood," he declared, his voice laced with disdain. "For your sins against God and man, you are hereby condemned to eternal unrest. You will walk these halls in sorrow, forever searching for what you have lost." Eliza's blood ran cold. Eliza Blackwood, the ghost, her ghost, had been named Eliza. A blinding surge of white-hot energy filled the room. The woman screamed one last time before her form was engulfed in shadow. The faceless figures vanished, leaving nothing but silence. Eliza stumbled backward, the truth clawed at her mind. The manor's curse had never been about tragic love or loss. It was vengeance, a punishment. And her name, was it mere coincidence that she shared the same name as the spirit bound to this house? The vision faded, and Eliza was back in the present, standing in the dimly lit hall of Blackwood Manor. Her knees buckled, and she gasped for air. The ghost, Eliza Blackwood, stood before her, no longer sorrowful but knowing. "You understand now," the spirit whispered. Eliza did. The curse wasn't just a legend, it was a wound, a scar upon time itself. The truth had been buried, the woman's story twisted into myth, and now she had been shown the past for a reason. "Eliza," she murmured, meeting the ghost's gaze, "how do I free you?" The manor groaned around them. The air thickened. Time was running out. The ghost reached forward, her translucent fingers brushing Eliza's temple. Memories flooded into her mind, whispers of a ritual long forgotten, a way to sever the binding that kept Eliza Blackwood trapped between life and death. But to break the curse, Eliza would have to make a choice, a choice that could mean never leaving Blackwood Manor again.